Hey folks, thanks for watching. It's Thursday, July 31st, and I don't know, I feel relieved I'm not catching up on a big weather event here this morning. No tsunamis yesterday, as far as I know, and no big derecho-like events. We still saw the heat lingering across the southeast, and we still see some showers lingering here this morning across the eastern Corn Belt, Indiana, into Ohio, a few rumbles of thunder there, and then down into the Carolinas, some Texas and Oklahoma showers as well. I did mention yesterday I was kind of rooting for some rain to get into the counties here in the Chicago metro area over into Northwest Indiana, call that the region, and then Southwest Michigan. This is an area that's been a little bit drier this year, so hoping we saw some storms get in there. You can kind of see them moving out of that area now. And fortunately, if I blow up this radar-derived precip, as yesterday, let's kind of scan over there. We did get some holes in here, but anywhere from like a half inch up to close to an inch here, just south of maybe Will County, Illinois, toward northwest Indiana, up toward an inch in southwestern Michigan. So we did get some nice precipitation into this corridor here, which is what we were rooting for. The nice thing is that we got precipitation through the Midwest over the last 24 hours without widespread severe reports on Wednesday. So a tornado report in Colorado, one in New Mexico there, but otherwise, again, just a scattering of wind reports, relatively quiet. Nothing like we saw earlier this week, whether it was Sunday. I could jump over and show you Monday. This was from the 28th, where we had the tornado reports in southern South Dakota that evolved into that derecho across northern Iowa. Large damaging wind event there, and we had essentially another kind of like dual derecho with a storm here over eastern Minnesota. I did talk to some folks across northern Iowa. They said they drove through here and saw quite a bit of corn laid down. I'm not surprised to hear that. We don't know how widespread it is, how significant it would be in terms of like final year number. I kind of went looking for this a little bit, and we do have some satellite passes over the area, but you have to consider that it's only been like 72 hours since the storm came through, so you're not probably drying out that corn yet, and it's going to be hard to see it on NDVI. When I went looking at the these low satellite passes over northern Iowa, I can see some holes in here. I know it's going to be hard to see on the screen, but it's hard for me to see too. Maybe some swaths through here, but I go back and compare this to a week ago, maybe like 2 weeks ago. I found a clean pass here, and I see those same holes. So these look more like just, non-crop fields, or maybe like wheat or something else going on here. So I don't see anything, on satellite yet across northern Iowa to indicate, widespread crop damage. We'll see in about a week. I think the NDVI values will show a little bit better story of, which counties saw the worst of it. But at least right now, I'm struggling to see anything kind of jumping out going before or after. Let me know if you see anything yourself, or maybe you catch something as I'm jumping back between these slides, but it doesn't look as widespread of an event as maybe we feared earlier this week. In terms of significant weather today, I do want to touch on this quickly. Over toward the Washington, D.C. area, up toward Philadelphia, and then much of the state of New Jersey is under a moderate risk for excessive rainfall today. So we've gotten through like a week without any one of these like major flash flooding stories. Obviously, we had the tsunami event, which ended up not being as concerning as first thought. We've seen the derecho-like events come through the Midwest, saw excessive heat, but we've avoided that like early July pattern where we had like a flash flooding emergency, I feel like, every other day. Unfortunately, that looks like it might be ending today with this moderate risk posted for a relatively highly populated area here. So in this corridor here, stay safe in terms of those flash flooding reports, and we'll be waiting and watching, looking for rain today. Just jump over and show that 3-kilometer NAM forecast. Let's make this valid. Let's do about 6 a.m. About the recording of this video. There's those showers and storms moving through Ohio and Indiana. Just kind of the other scattering showers that we saw on that radar earlier. We see those increasing coverage through Pennsylvania today, down across the Appalachian, along the Blue Ridge in Virginia. See some storms starting in New Jersey, southeastern Pennsylvania near Harrisburg. And then if I take this to 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m., notice that I just went 4 hours ahead and the story didn't change. I'm still talking about some thunderstorms moving through Maryland, D.C. area, to the Delmarva Peninsula, up into New Jersey, up into New York, across portions of New England. These more so just showers, and then kind of lingering showers and storms here over the Carolinas and Virginia, and then back down through Arkansas, Louisiana. We are also watching along the Front Range some storms to come off that later today. You can see those moving into western Nebraska, into the Sandhills, northern Colorado through eastern Wyoming, maybe getting into south central South Dakota. But again, this is now 8 p.m. and I'm still seeing pretty heavy rain stretching across this area here. So you can see the reason for that moderate risk today. We do have some severe potential over here today. If I jump over and show you that in the Storm Prediction Center, with a slight risk. So with all those thunderstorms moving through, the chance that we do get some severe reports pretty high, at least kind of a scattering of wind reports. and a lesser so tornado threat, but can't rule it out today. And then over here along the Front Range into Wyoming, and that marginal risk extending up into southwest South Dakota, western Nebraska. You can see northern Colorado there as well. And then those kind of lingering showers at the end of the front there in Arkansas, prompting a marginal risk there. That risk shifts further south in terms of the Carolinas tomorrow. This takes us into Friday, but a very similar corridor here in Colorado up through western South Dakota. As we get into tomorrow, we can actually take this forecast out from the 3-kilometer NAM. See, overnight tonight, look at how quiet we are versus where we were early in the week now into tomorrow afternoon. And I can show you those storms coming off the Front Range tomorrow afternoon along that moderate risk. And here over the Carolinas, stretching through Georgia and Mississippi. This area is going to be active over the kind of 7 to 10 day forecast just in terms of precipitation, maybe thunderstorms as well. I want to jump over and show you this. So we've seen this map stay very busy this week. This is the National Hurricane Center, their outlook, their 7-day outlook for tropical cyclone formation in the central and eastern Pacific. We saw Iona weaken yesterday morning, back down into a tropical storm. Kelly is now off the board as well, but yet there's another potential area of formation that we're watching in the central Pacific. We saw recently named tropical storm Gil fire up in the more far eastern Pacific, and then yet another system behind this. So continuing to see the eastern Pacific light up this year. And if we just jump over and look at the satellite there, man, Gil looks pretty impressive for a tropical storm. Those are this deep tropical convection over what looks like it might be forming a little eye in here. So would not be surprised if this one's forming a little bit faster than expected. It's over some warm waters here. We always usually this time of year have some very warm waters just west of Mexico. And I can get some powerful storms as a result of that. The good news for Hawaii, well, I should say some mixed news, is that it's expected to weaken, but it is expected to turn over the weekend and actually kind of head pretty much on a beeline toward the islands of Hawaii. Now, the good news that I was referencing at the beginning of this is it's expected to weaken because over the next kind of 72 hours, expecting a strengthening toward hurricane strength. I would say that's maybe starting to undergo right now this morning based on the strength of those thunderstorms. But the waters get cold very quickly outside of that like wedge of warm water I showed you. So as it gets further north up toward those Hawaiian latitudes at like 20 degrees north, it starts pushing west. You can see it weaken into a tropical depression, or maybe even something more remnant than that. You can see that here. There's those wedge of warm sea surface temperatures. Hurricanes like about 28 Celsius and above. You can marginally at 27. So this is kind of the corridor in here where it has to form. And it's somewhere in here. And as it pushes west, it's losing those warm water temperatures. And as it goes north, it's this is going to slam the door on any additional tropical development. So whatever's heading toward Hawaii is going to be a remnant system, but some of these remnant, even like a tropical depression, can cause issues, can cause some flooding if they have rain associated with it. All the mountainous terrain, obviously on the Big Island or further west, can cause some flooding. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as we get into early next week, maybe like Tuesday, Wednesday. Now, I bring those hurricanes up because they're relevant. They've been pulling, we talked about this earlier in summer, they've been pulling this ridging that's been trying to set up here this year toward the west. And I think as much as we've talked about some of the antecedent moisture in the southeast, the other kind of big curveball this year has been all the activity in the eastern Pacific in terms of tropical formation, trying to pull this ridge out of here and preventing drought from building into the middle part of the country at times. We're seeing that again this week. You can see this kind of weak ridging here, but with Gil forming quickly, we'll actually see Gil come up here toward Hawaii on this 500 millibar height map from the ECMWF. There's Gil. Looks pretty decent here, but look at this ridge trying to follow it. You can see these higher contours. So it was here. It's starting to get pulled west again. We see this ridge forming over Canada. This is Saturday. And look at what it's replacing it. We have what I mentioned earlier, these lower heights are this weak troughing that builds in just with that ridge trying to leave. Still have this ridge over Canada. I'm worried about some of the wildfires here with some heat returning to this area. You can see this low coming into Oregon, hoping to get some rainfall through here this weekend. This takes us into Monday, still seeing that weak troughing. And then with Gil starting to weaken, now you can see it making that beeline toward Hawaii as a remnant system. That ridge starts to try to come back over the Four Corners region. It's going to try to do that over the next kind of few days into the next work week. But we do see these kind of lingering short waves coming through this corridor here, bringing more rain to the southeast, bringing thunderstorm chances variably toward this corridor here through the Midwest, up into the western Corn Belt and the Central Plains. And then also seeing some systems come through here in the Pacific Northwest where we've been very dry this year, hoping for some precipitation out of some of these. We'll look at that in just a second. Take the forecast even further out, and we can still see tropical development behind Gil, right? We had that another system to watch, and that might be doing its own kind of pushing and pulling of that ridge here. If I take the forecast all the way out to August 9th, this is kind of well beyond where I wanted to show just in this. But you can see ridging trying to reestablish here over the Northeast Pacific, here over New England, and then in between these little short waves that we've seen all year long. So not a huge pattern change, at least from the ECMWF in the long range, but I want to show you some differences in the AFS a little bit further in this video. If we look at the ECMWF precipitation forecast, we'll just kind of take this day by day here. Let's make this valid about 7 a.m. this morning. There's the showers and storms we talked about in the eastern Corn Belt. Those continue today across the mid-Atlantic with that flooding. Just scattered convection here today over the high plains. We'll take this to tomorrow. We saw that continue. Remember that's in the same corridor here. See western Montana trying to get some precipitation in here to the prairie. Otherwise significant precipitation chances across the southeast. Take this into Saturday. See prairie precipitation increases, including all the way over toward northern Montana, the Golden Triangle there. Southeast continues, Georgia, Alabama, southern Mississippi. And then there's Sunday. That was that first system kind of curling around that once that ridge got out of the way, right? We saw that kind of weak troughing developing in this area. So we see some of this precipitation get out into central Nebraska and then north into Kansas, western Oklahoma. Continuing to see precipitation across the southeast, now Florida. Take this into Monday. Still seeing some remnant precipitation again with those little short waves coming around, and then still seeing the southeast. I mentioned how much rain we were expecting over here a few times this week. And then we'll take this out Wednesday, Thursday, seeing another one of these systems come through. So multiple chances of precipitation in this corridor here. Some of this getting into the Midwest, and then the southeast as we go through that 7-day forecast. You can see some of that all the way at the end of next week coming through the Midwest there. So that gets us out just over a week. How can we sum this up? Let's do the next 5 days of precipitation. You can see this corridor of precipitation across the southeast, that first kind of weak trough that moves through the central and southern plains. There's that prairie precipitation getting in here to central Oregon, trying to get some precipitation here to northern Idaho and eastern Washington. Take it out 7 days, don't see much of a change other than increased precipitation here across the Atlanta metro area. Concerned about some flooding in here just given how many repeated days of precipitation we're going to have. And then if we go to day 4 to 10, again, next week, kind of Wednesday through Friday, little chances here for storms to come out of the prairie all the way into the Midwest. We can see some areas of dryness now showing up. Call this kind of Ontario, Quebec over into the eastern Corn Belt. And then this other area is that ridge kind of gets pulled back and forth between this area from those tropical systems. Keeps trying to reestablish. This is where that ridge wants to set up in August this year. So we're going to see it additionally try to come back here as we get out into the forecast. The question will be as we go into like August 10th, 11th, and 12th, is this ridge going to surge back up into the northern plains or try to push back toward the Midwest? And we're seeing some of that in the long range. I'll show that in just a second here. In terms of temperatures, here's the next 5 days. This takes us out from Thursday into early next week. And again, with that ridge kind of getting pulled west by Gill here, seeing that warmth stay off in the northern Canadian prairie here. I mentioned my concerns for those wildfires to the north as a result of that. Otherwise, huge relief coming this weekend. We've been talking about this repeatedly this week, but that high pressure system coming down out of Canada is, I think, going to make for a pretty nice weekend across much of the Midwest, the Central Plains, the Mid-South, even over toward the Mid-Atlantic once we clear out some of this precipitation here today and tomorrow. If we do the next 5 to 10 days, this is basically the next work week at this point. We stay generally cooler across this corridor here, but slowly warming up as this ridge tries to pull back into this area here. See, as that ridge over Canada moves further east over Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, see that heat increase quickly in August over those burning wildfires here. So the concern continues for the busy Canadian wildfire season, but otherwise relatively cool next week across the middle part of the country. And there's just the 10-day average of the whole set there. Do want to jump over and look at more long-range temperatures. Let's do this grid here. So I'm looking at the right side of this. We kind of just looked at the left two panels, if you will. So I'm looking at the far right side here. And this top one's the ECMWF ENS. This is the 10 to 15 day temperature anomalies. This takes us all the way from the 10th to the 15th of August. You can see bringing some warmth back into New England as that ridge moves further east across Canada over the next 10 days. So New England, the Canadian Maritimes, and seeing some of that heat move back into the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, the Four Corners, in between still staying relatively mild from the ECMWF ensemble. We see that as well from the GFS. Still relatively mild across the central part of the country, warmer over in New England, warmer over in the Northwest. And then the AFS is always a little bit more magnified, so there's that heat over the Northeast and the heat over the Northwest. Still lacking kind of a long-range heat or ridge signal in the middle part of the country as we look toward mid-August. We're kind of waiting and watching to see if it's there. And if I take the forecast well out, I can start to find a dry signal here, but I'm yet to see that big warm signal that maybe we were worried about at the end of July. Now, I mentioned I can find a dry signal, so I did pull up the ECMWF AIFS. It's performed well in the long range this year, but we can't take any individual run from it as gospel this far out. This is a 300-hour forecast, so this takes us all the way to Tuesday, August 12th, and you can see it does establish a large ridge over the northwest in Canada, and it kind of establishes this from a center of this ridge over the western U.S. So unlike the current ridge forecast this weekend, which is kind of broken apart, there's this piece below it, there's a little trough sneaking underneath it. That one at the end of the forecast period would not allow much to sneak underneath it. So this is like Tuesday to Wednesday. This is almost down to week 3 at this point. With a lot of this flow coming out of here, probably looking at a strong high pressure system somewhere in here. Decent rain chances in this corridor, starting to shift drier in this area here from this forecast. We're starting to see that pop up on some of the long range forecasts for precipitation. So if I showed you the ECMWF AIFS 8 to 14 days, so the 8th through the 14th, you can see this area here is starting to show up drier, whereas we're wetter off to the east, wetter in the central portions of Canada, and then over into the Midwest and the Mid-South here. So that's really the only kind of ridge signal I've seen in terms of the middle part of the country. But even that, right, the temperatures wouldn't be terribly too hot here. We saw that from the AFS forecast just a second ago. Let's see if we can pull that up. No, I'm not going to be able to. That's okay. That was just the AFS, but I'll show you the ENS and the GFS forecast for that long-range precip mud as well. We're on that panel. ENS keeps this area a little bit wetter from the 7th through the 13th. It's not the exact same time period. We still stay wetter here. We can see that ridge trying to reestablish over the southwest. I mentioned earlier that appears to be, at least right now, through the first half of August, where that ridge wants to set up over Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, or Colorado, or even the Four Corners region, and we stay stormy around the periphery of that. We jump over and look at the GFS. You can see it trying to build that back up. This is now the 8th through the 14th, so that matches up with the AFS, where it's trying to build that dryness back up through the northern part of the country, keeping the rain here to the east, but we're not seeing that warmth build in with it. It's more of that kind of cooler and drier, kind of maybe August signal that we talked about in the middle part of July. We were looking at some analogs. I do want to peer out into fall a little bit as we kind of just looked at mid-August. I mentioned this kind of northwest, strong northwest ridge configuration from the AFS. When I went through analogs of dry fall years, I pulled up all these. These were some of the driest years in this corridor here. I tried to find kind of that Mississippi River Valley watershed drought that we've seen in the last few years. And I said, show me the driest years for that corridor here. And I pulled up 24. That makes sense because that's last year. That was very dry in this quarter. Pulled up 2022. That makes sense. Another recent year where we had Mississippi water levels low. 2011, 99, and 76. So I pulled up these years here. And I'm trying to look for similarities between what we saw in these years, at least in this part of August, and if we have to be worried about some of this dryness settling, kind of like we saw, right, from the AFS at the end of that forecast period. And the first thing I did is I said, okay, from August to October for 22, 24, 2011, 99, and 76, these dry years for the middle part of the country, what sort of, trough ridge configuration did we have? And this one I wasn't surprised to see. Large ridge, kind of anchored over the western U.S., northwest flow coming out of Canada, and then this almost cut off like trough here in the eastern U.S. You'll often see these pop up on these historical analogs because that's going to cut off that flow from the Gulf from getting this way. So this is a low pressure system. The air is going to flow counterclockwise around that. And you can see that actually pulling Gulf air away from the middle part of the country. So northwest flow isn't necessarily bad in August for thunderstorms if you can get Gulf moisture to run into it, but this little cutoff here over the Carolinas is going to keep the Gulf, what we call, kind of closed for business, with none of that flow getting back up in the middle part of the country. And that ridge is just going to do the rest of the work, bringing a high pressure system kind of over here over Minnesota, keeping this area dry. So I wasn't surprised to see that configuration. I wanted to see what did the sea surface temperatures look like in these years and kind of compare it to what we're seeing this year. So I jumped over and I said, okay, give me all those years, those anomalies from those sea surface temperatures. We see La Nina, pretty clear La Nina signature. A lot of cold water here off the coast of Alaska and the Northeast Pacific. And some warm water here east of Japan and the North Pacific, north of Hawaii. Some warm water here in the North Atlantic, otherwise pretty mixed in the central Atlantic. A little bit of warmth here over the maritime continent, or what we call Indonesia. And then here over the Indian Ocean, kind of the western Indian Ocean, cool. So cool, warm, cool, warm, cool. That's not exactly what we're seeing this year. If I can come over and pull up, see if I can get those current sea surface temperatures, if I have those in here. Looks like I don't have it pulled up. That's easy. We can do that quickly. So I want to look at those current sea surface temperatures and compare that to what we're seeing. And there's some differences here. So if I pull this up, here's that analog for those dry falls. If I pull this up now, we're cold here, but we're very warm all the way across the North Pacific. I mean, nowhere in the North Pacific can you find cold water. We're warm here over Indonesia. We're warm across the Indian Ocean. We are warm in the North Atlantic. So those two line up, but still some similarities here, but I wouldn't call them huge. And so I said, okay, that's fair enough. What if I take out 76? Because that's so far back, 50 years ago, that maybe it's muddying up the thought experiment here. So when I took that out, we started to see warmth increase across the North Pacific, started to see that Atlantic start to warm. Still seeing this warmth here across Indonesia, that little cool water off of the Arabian Peninsula here. If we compare that, it's a little bit more similar with that warmth spreading across the North Pacific and the North Atlantic. And then if I lop off 99, again, let's just say that's too far away, 26 years ago. 99 is already 26 years ago, geez. See that warmth increasing here in the North Pacific, the North Atlantic, across this area of Indonesia. We're still seeing that little cold signal off the Arabian Peninsula. So as I kind of at least do these more recent years, we are seeing a little bit more similarities between the two. And a part of that reason, I think, is why we're seeing some of these long-range forecasts, both from the ECMWF seasonal and from the Climate Prediction Center go over dry for August, September, and October. There's enough similarities just in these recent dry falls, I think, and what we're seeing in those current sea surface temperatures. And if I just kind of pull up the difference from the global mean rather than the historical, I'll just pull that up so we can see that. We actually can look at there's that western Indian Ocean cold, warm, cold, warm in the North Pacific, even kind of getting up warm in the Northeast Pacific, warm in the North Atlantic. There's enough similarities here to start to call out that kind of dry fall risk. And even if I take the seasonal forecast from the ECMWF, this will update next week, so I'm curious to see what this says. If I take it out into like August or September from those 500 millibar heights, it's hard to see much on these seasonal forecasts in terms of these 500 millibars, but you can see kind of maybe a weak troughing here south of Alaska, ridging here over Montana, and then this weak troughing over the Carolinas. That doesn't look too different. There's that troughing over Alaska, ridging over Montana, troughing over the Carolinas. So at least the long-range models are setting up in a pattern that looks similar to these recent dry falls, enough to call it out as a concern this year. It is worth mentioning these have not been perfect this year, but this is our kind of best signal to go off of right now, so it's worth talking about here. The only other thing I wanted to catch on before the end of the video here is the Atlantic, with that MJO clearly boosting tropical activity in the central and eastern Pacific with all the storms there. We're kind of waiting and watching in early August for it to move over the Atlantic, and we're wondering, are we going to see the same activity pick up here? I'm skeptical of that right now. I do think we'll have a few systems to watch, right? Some of these kind of yellow and oranges on the National Hurricane Center's board for that 7-day outlook, but I don't think we're going to see like 3 or 4 named storms in early August come racing out of the main development region, lighting us up for tropical storm watches or hurricane watches. We might see 1 or 2 systems, but there's just too much Saharan air that I've seen. We're still seeing some shear come here off Central America, and I don't think the Atlantic is going to be favorable early in the season as it maybe it's compared to the Pacific. We might have to be waiting further out into the hurricane season for more bona fide tropical storm activity. I'll leave it there today. It is Thursday. Eric should be back with you all tomorrow. Appreciate you following along this week.